Good evening. My name is Heather Allen, and I am the Development Director for the ARC of Central Virginia. I would just like to welcome everyone to tonight's Candidate Forum, and I would like to give a special thank you to Mr. Eaton and Mr. Walker for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will share that link onto our Facebook page, so you are welcome to go back and rewatch, or maybe even share with someone who is not able to join us live. We also have time for a Q&A at the end of our closing remarks. So please feel free to use the Q&A dialog box, and you're welcome to type in your questions at any time, and we'll be happy to answer those. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our moderator and amazing board president, Joe Matthews. Thank you, Joe.
Hi, Heather. Thank you. And welcome candidates, Greg Eaton and Wendell Walker. We're glad you're here tonight. I'm the president of the board of the ARC of Central Virginia, and we work very hard for the individuals that we serve here in the region. And we have some issues that we would like to hear your views on. So thank you again for being here. Let's start with our first one. Please describe your personal and or professional experience working with people with developmental disabilities, including any policies or programs you have been a part of creating. Mr. Eaton, would you go first, please?
Sure. Well, first I'll say that in prep for the forum, I educated myself about the issues of the developmentally disabled. I suspect that that was the real motivation for this forum, not for you to learn our positions on these issues, but for us to learn for ourselves what the issues are. And again, I'm grateful for that. It's been a good experience. So I have not had much direct experience working with the developmentally disabled, but I've made efforts to foster inclusion of diverse people in public life. I educated teachers at the graduate level, the University of Lynchburg, in environmental science and biology, and some were enrolled in the Master of Education in Special Ed. So I learned something about their motivations and their challenges just through osmosis. In the late 80s, I worked as a trade instructor at the Old Dominion Job Corps Center in Monroe. My students were age 16 to 22 and came from diverse circumstances. One thing in common they had was that they could not or would not complete their K-12 education in a conventional setting. Some were sent by the courts to the Job Corps Center in lieu of incarceration, I suppose. Some were sent by their parents, some by high school guidance counselors or other advisors in their communities. And among them were rarely an exceptionally intelligent youth from a very troubled environment, but the majority were intellectually or behaviorally incapable of success in high school. Occasionally, students would enter my trade, which was landscaping, with documentation of disability, most commonly intellectual or learning disabilities, but some with an apparent developmental cause. So the diverse circumstances they came from included inner city illegal drug culture and gang activity and deeply rural poverty, and in between, some from suburban backgrounds and even some occasionally with from some affluence, sort of in between those two ends of the gradient. Another commonality of all these folks is that they were all in my class and they were all in residence in dormitories all together. I was necessarily an advocate of diversity and equity and inclusion efforts because they were required in order for students and staff of such diverse backgrounds to get along. Part of my job was finding employment placement for my students, and these students who internalized the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion were much more easily acclimated to their new work and life environment and were more successful in keeping those jobs. With this experience, I was helpful in efforts to incorporate DEI, as it's called, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in institutional settings, that is, universities where I worked, and nonprofit professional associations, for example, through collaboration with the Center for Diversity and the Environment. So I have my own challenges in remaining mindful of equity and inclusion, of being empathic throughout the distractions of a day. Probably everyone does, but I don't want to be discriminated against, and I am bound to work against discrimination of others. We're all in this together, and the sooner we learn that, the sooner we'll begin to work out our way out of countless dauntless problems we face as a society.
Mr. Walker?
Okay. So up front, I haven't been involved with or hands-on directly in any way dealing with people of handicaps, whether they be physical handicaps, mental handicaps, things like that. But these are individuals that God created. And I think it's important that we have a heart and a mind to reach out into all we can, whatever levels, whether it's government, nonprofit organizations. I know that a church that I attend and have attended since 1975, Thomas Road, we had a ministry to reach out and bring individuals with handicap and disabilities to our services. And so there were ways we were trying to help meet their physical, their spiritual, their mental abilities, because everybody ought to have an opportunity in life to do the best that they can, regardless of those handicaps. And I think it is up to us as a society to try to encourage and motivate these individuals to the best of our abilities here. Now, in some cases, they're severe handicap individuals. You know, much of what the training center up in Madison Heights used to care for. You know, over the years, government has made some decisions and has changed some of the directions that they're going as far as helping people with disabilities. I think some have been good in some areas, some that have severe disabilities. I can't say I always agreed with those decisions, but nevertheless, those are needs out there. I think when it comes to meeting and working with these needs that these individuals have, we need to explore every option that we can. You know, government is not always the answer for everything in our life. We've got nonprofits. We have great organizations out here that can come along and be partners in helping individuals with handicaps. I know for about 20 years, I worked with the Virginia Department of Labor and Industry, and my job there is director of apprenticeship, job training programs. And so we have worked with the Division of Rehabilitation here in the Lynchburg area. I know up at the Virginia Western Hospital up in Stanton, I believe it is. You know, we've developed programs to help these individuals that have some physical handicap that could actually produce some income for themselves. And when you do that, that just creates a motivation in their life that they can accomplish things, even with their disabilities. Anytime we can motivate and encourage individuals in these areas to do for themselves as much as they can, there's that pride. And it's something that we need to foster as much as we can. On the government side, I've only been in the General Assembly 2 years, so I haven't dealt specifically with issues. While we support whatever we can from a financial standpoint, I think there's ways in which government can do a better job. And we need to take a look and listen to the professionals out here that deal with these individuals on a daily basis and try to tweak and find out how we can be better effective in serving the citizens of the Commonwealth with the handicap abilities they may have. So that's one of the desires I would have, you know, in our upcoming session, once we can kind of get the politics out of the way and get down to servicing helping the citizens of the Commonwealth. I think that was important. And we need to have as much information coming from you folks. I mean, you are on the front line every day working with these precious individuals. And so the more we can understand how we can help you, whether it be financial or other areas, that's what we need to know, because we're here to serve Virginians. Thank you.
Thank you. Virginia has a waiting list of more than 13,000 people, 3,000 of whom are in urgent need for Medicaid DD waivers. These waivers fund home and community services that help people with developmental disabilities to live life fully included in their community. How would you help ensure our General Assembly makes ending this wait a priority so no one with a developmental disability is waiting for essential services? Mr. Eaton?
My understanding is that Medicaid developmental disability waivers are limited by state funding of the waivers and by staffing shortages that would process those as a result of low reimbursement rates for these professionals. And it results in a waiting list of those who want the waivers for utilizing Medicaid benefits outside of institutional settings. So past records of General Assembly activity now in the code suggests that it's long been the, quote, the intent of the General Assembly to eliminate the waiting lists for services pursuant to the Intellectual Disability Medicaid waiver and the Individual and Family Developmental Disabilities and Support Medicaid waiver. This was in 2010. So if they had that intention, pretty firm intention in 2010, and now it's 11 years later and we still have this issue, then that we haven't as a community addressed those issues successfully. So the American Rescue Plan also authorized an increase in federal medical assistance percentage, that FMAP percentage payments by 10 percentage points for eligible home and community-based services. That was between, I guess, eligible between April 2021 and March 2022. Let's see here. So this implies that the will to deal with this issue in the federal government, this issue and others, in the federal government and in the General Assembly is there to deal with this problem. And the will of the governor's office also seems to be aligned. It appears that more funding than ever has been allocated and promised to address disability services, including through Medicaid expansion, the American Rescue Plan, and especially for home and community-based care. So I'm not certain of the cause of the waiting list. Waiver applications and processes are bureaucratic. And so a developmentally disabled individual would be among the least able to handle these kinds of bureaucratic application procedures themselves, so that they depend even more than most would on professionals, local direct service professionals. There was a 2019 report that cited the need for funding of central control mechanisms to reduce fragmented communication between the Department of Behavioral Health and Disability Services and community service boards. So this, to me, sort of implies that it's not a problem of will in our administration or our General Assembly. It's not really a problem of gross level funding. It is a kind of bureaucratic problem. Now, a member of the General Assembly could advocate for changes in state budget allocation for particular services, including through the state budget, allocating funds to reduce or eliminate the waiting list for developmentally disabled waivers for Medicaid. But it might be a stretch to make personnel recommendations in a state agency. So maybe this, some of my information for this came from a joint legislative audit and review commission, which is a group of those legislators in the General Assembly and some outside experts. They sort of task themselves with finding particular, well, audit and review of particular programs in the state and how legislation might influence that. So maybe one of these joint legislative review commissions would be a reasonable place to start for trying to determine what the real causes are of these Medicaid waiver waiting lists. And there might be some federal legislation really soon that might be available to help. In March 2021, there was an article in Disability Scoop that was titled, "Waiting Lists May Be Eliminated for Disability Services Provided by Medicaid." Sounded very promising. And it was an article dealing with the Home Care and Behavioral Services Access Act, which is proposed legislation, not passed legislation, and it takes a great deal more effort to get something passed. But it sounds like at the federal level and at the state level, there is the will to address these issues in home-based and community-based care of the developmentally disabled. And it's really an issue of finding our, sort of process. Maybe you need a program manager to figure out where the bottlenecks are and propose some remedies to those bottlenecks.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Okay, thank you. Government has a tendency to throw money at so many programs out here. And with a short period of time that we have to deal with issues in the General Assembly every year, whether it's a 45-day session or a 60-day session, it's really hard to follow up and find out what systems are not working efficiently. And I think that's important, that how can we fix something if we don't know what's broken and how to go about fixing or solving these problems with delays or not getting the proper funding in the right areas. I can't help but think about the last year, the issues that just people in general have had with our state government when it comes to the DMV, the Virginia Employment Commission. These systems are broken. We've got to rethink how we can be better efficiently at servicing our citizens, as well as funding those needs. And I think, there again, you have all kinds of studies out here, but sometimes these JLARC studies, I don't think are broad enough to incorporate the information that we need from the folks on the front line, like you here in Central Virginia and across the Commonwealth. Until we fully understand how these issues need to be adjusted or refined, it's hard for us to keep funding something that is not really benefiting the citizens. I mean, we can put money into programs, but if it doesn't get to the individual needs in an adequate period of time, then it's nothing more than government getting in the way of individuals who need critical help. So I think that's one thing we would probably need to do is come up with a study and broaden it enough that we have the right kind of input by which to move forward, finding a solution. Sometimes we create agencies that create regulations, that create bureaucracy. And by the time we get around to actually helping people, they've almost given up on us. That's not service to our communities. That's not what Virginia should be getting out here. Before I would put in any bills to fund additional things, I'd want to know, how can we fix what's broken? How can we increase to be more efficient in delivering the services that you guys out here are trying to deal with every day? It may take some federal help, it may take some state help. But I think when we sit down and work together and get these issues out on the table where we can understand how we can get our arms around these and find that solution, then we can have a foundation of understanding by which we can solve these issues. So there's many challenges out here. The physical mental health is just one portion of a big, big picture. So sometimes it's who screams the loudest that gets the help. Sad to say, that's where we are. But in the short period of time we have to address issues, then we have to depend on the agencies such as yours, the ARC here, to tell us what can we do on a state level or government level, how to help support the needs within our communities, of course, across the Commonwealth. So that would be my approach there.
Thank you. About, excuse me, about 3% of the population has a developmental disability. In Virginia, that equates to just over 250,000 people not to mention family members who are directly affected by a loved one's disability. What do you think the role of a delegate should be in supporting people with developmental disabilities and their families? Mr. Eaton?
Well, I think delegates should be civil and respectful to each other to model good behavior between people with diverse backgrounds and needs. Delegates should learn and acknowledge that building diversity, equity, and inclusion in our communities is a key to sustainability. That delegates should be eager to learn and educate themselves in aspects of developmental disability processes and services, including some knowledge of the scope of need in Virginia and especially in their home communities. And delegates need to be faithful representatives of their home constituents. Delegates should be familiar with funding mechanisms for state agencies like the Department of Behavioral Health and Disability Services, and be advocates for equity in the distribution of funds across Virginia according to need. Delegates should make purposeful connections to the community service boards and authorities in their communities and serve as state policy liaisons to local agencies and organizations. Delegates should make a commitment to protect state funding for developmental disability services to reduce the strain on the budgets of local agencies and nonprofit organizations. And finally, delegates should listen.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Okay. Yes, it is important to listen to understand the needs within our community, understanding that there are a lot of agencies out here. And certainly, as I've indicated this past year with the COVID, there have been many constituent requests, and trying to get to all these requests and work with our state government, trying to find solutions is a full-time job. We're part-time legislators. So we spend a lot of our time trying to help individuals. And it's generally the ones that scream the loudest. You know, I'd be glad to come over and visit with you folks to get a better understanding of how we can help there in the General Assembly on certain matters here. But we leave it up to, I believe it's important to leave it up to the local people who know best, because you work with these individuals with these disabilities every day. You understand those needs. And that's what we need to be able to do for you, is how can we help bring organizations, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's ministries, employers, government together to try to find solutions. As I indicated earlier, government is not always the answer, but the better we can understand how we can help serve and do our part out here, yes. Now, when it comes to getting along with each other, yeah, life is a give and take. And I think it's important to listen. That's what I try to do, is to listen and understand. So I get invites all the time to come out to businesses, and, you know, to see what their specific needs are, whether it's their training, their workforce needs, or other areas that they have. So the more time that we can spend helping and understand the issues, then when we get into the General Assembly, bills come before us, we have a better understanding of debating these bills, how we can help support the individuals here. You know, but a lot of times it's up to the constituents. It's easy to complain, but unless you step up to the plate and you say, this is what our specific needs are, then we know how to go about addressing those. So life is a two-way street. And the more we can understand, and this forum is good. This is helping me to better understand what the ARC does right here in our own community. While I've known it for many years, but the more I can understand how these needs can be met, whether it's the physical home that these individuals are in, whether it's other organizations helping to support you, the financial needs are great. We know and understand that. But at the same time, we're responsible as far as legislators to use the taxpayers' money wisely. So if there's areas of government that need to be critiqued, reviewed, or fixed, then those are areas that certainly we can do something about. But I think the more important thing is that the ability to communicate and understand what the needs are before we get into the General Assembly, then we can address bills that can actually help and deliver services that folks need out here. Sometimes we don't hear from folks until December, just before we go into session. When you have thousands of bills being thrown at you at one time, and you only have a certain period of time in which to deal with them, I need to have that homework prepared ahead of time before you bring a bill or you submit a bill to the General Assembly requesting some type of help. Then I can say, this is what the ARC does in Lynchburg. This is how they're meeting the needs of special people. And this is what I think we need to do. So that helps us as far as legislators, is wisdom. And the more wisdom we have, I think the better decisions and services we can offer to constituents.
Thank you. The General Assembly has made great advancements in the last 5 years to fund housing subsidies set aside for people with developmental disabilities. The result has been an increase in people living independently with supports and having happier lives. However, that can only be sustained with ongoing state funds, as many people with a developmental disability have a monthly income of just $791 from Social Security benefits. How do we ensure we keep fully integrated, affordable housing accessible? Mr. Eaton, please.
Well, this is an example of how government is the answer to a lot of the issues that face especially the neediest in our communities. And government is structured in a very sometimes irrational way, but it's probably necessary, I suppose, for the structure to exist. And I'm talking about how there are multiple agencies that deal with the same issues. The Department of Behavioral Health and Disability Services seems to be the lead, but Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development can administer affordable and special needs housing loans. They combine state and federal resources to provide a simplified and comprehensive application process. And this is kind of important, considering that the form to apply for flexible funding for help in independent housing is 13 pages long. You could try to shorten that form. That might help, but chances are they've tried to do that in the past, and we need 13 pages of information in order to make decisions about funding. But a developmentally disabled individual is certainly going to be stressed out to try to complete those 13 pages all by themselves. So the Federal Investment Partnerships, Home Investment Partnerships Program, and the National Housing Trust Fund, and the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, all government programs through the Department of Housing and Community Development, they support the creation of permanent supportive housing units to serve Virginia's most vulnerable citizens. So the Department of Housing and Community Development allocated $7 million through the HOME program, $4 million through the National Housing Trust Fund, $12 million through the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, and an allotment of about $500,000 through permanent supportive housing funds. So this sounds like a lot of money, but it takes a lot of money to serve the citizens of Virginia and of our area. So it's pretty important that you think long and carefully about reauthorizing these funds. You mentioned in this question that the General Assembly has made great advances in the last 5 years, and I would agree. And it's not just the General Assembly, but Governor Northam's administration invested $55 million in the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, and the governor's budget proposal increased it to $70 million in the next year. And this again is an indication of the will. Our state government has the will to help the most needy in our communities. I believe that. And I believe they are smart enough to get this done, but the devil's in the details, so to speak. So how to get these funds efficiently to the programs that need it, and ultimately to the people that need it, is really key. One thing that might help is the Disability Law Center of Virginia. That's an advocate and an aid both to the recipients of this aid and to government and to providers also. And all of us really are involved in advocacy during the state budget making process, during the sausage making process. The importance of advocates for these people who really can't very well speak for themselves is pretty critically important.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
So we see that there are a lot of government agencies out here with money and the ability to help. What I think happens so many times is we have so many agencies, they're getting in front of each other. They're not actually accomplishing what the ultimate will is, and that is delivering the service directly to those in need. People on the front line out here know better and understand how they can utilize these funds. But when you have bureaucracy out here trying to govern, and they can't even seem to get it right, the money is there, but is it really getting to the individuals with a need? One role we have as legislators is we have to be accountable. We have to use the funds that the taxpayers are providing to the general fund in the wisest way that we can, the most efficient way, in a way that services, the needs out here. So going back to the JLAW study that I mentioned earlier, I think sometimes we just need to stop before we create more programs, more laws, and find out what really is working, what is broken. Let's fix it. So therefore, at the end of the day, then we are accountable to the taxpayers and then to the individual needs by which the money is being spent for. So there are different ways by which you can meet the housing needs out here. Some may not be as severe as others. And I think that's where working with your localities, your local governments, and finding out what is a more efficient way we can help people, whether it's group homes or other type of housing needs that these individuals need, and see if local government can maybe make some revisions to some of their codes by which to help minimize the cost and the burden there. So I think a more efficient way of operating our funds in Richmond and the organizations, the agencies such as you out here, those needs can be met without continually increasing the taxes on the folks out here. Efficiency is very important. That is one thing that government does not do well at all. But by having the inputs that you have, it helps us. And something else that is also helpful too. I love to interact with people. And I think it'd be great to have some of your individuals come to the General Assembly this session. I know last year COVID put a roadblock and stood in the way of the public, being able to communicate with the legislators. I hope that's not the case come January. I'd love for the ARC to bring people down to the General Assembly and talk to us legislators. Some of us serve on committees that would like to know more about how we can help the individuals. I think when we can see the personal individuals and where the needs are and how we can utilize that money, I think it's easier for us to support a bill and support programs and funds out here. That's just a suggestion, whether or not you're able to do that. But we have many visitors that come down, a lot of them with their hands out. We have to talk to them, understand, and how we can help service them. So that would be, some suggestions there. But by all means, I'm extending an invitation to you folks tonight. If you'd love to come to Richmond, I'm your legislator. I'm there to serve you and help you, and I'd love to do that.
Thank you. People with developmental disabilities are generally employed at much lower rates than the typical population. despite a desire for meaningful paid employment. How do we promote employment of people with developmental disabilities in Virginia? Mr. Eaton?
Some studies indicate that hiring persons with disabilities are good business decisions. They represent a highly motivated workforce. They stay on the job for a longer period of time, reducing training costs for other new employees. They improve workplace culture and morale. They promote ethical business in the community. If the community can see that you are a business that hires in the disabled, from the disabled population. It's a good idea to disseminate positive stories, and I know that that the nonprofit agencies involved and the state agencies involved put a premium on this, disseminating positive stories. And it's not easy to get those stories to the people who really need to hear them. These are marketing challenges. Marketing is another, yet another field of expertise. Not everybody has, but they can come in handy on occasion. Coming to Richmond before the General Assembly is a good idea. But maybe the actual people with disabilities, those people in person, would be effective presenters at the General Assembly. Institutionalization in restrictive environments keeps these folks from integrating in their community. They are not very visible in their community. If they were more visible, if they were better integrated, if they were able to be their own advocates in many instances, then I think that would ease their integration a good deal. You know, we're really fortunate in the Lynchburg area to have Lynchburg Grows. It's a nonprofit with service to the disabled community and its mission, and via employment at their farm. It would be really helpful to take note of examples of Lynchburg Grows because they are very visible, very popular. They're at the community market. They do have events at their own farm. And they've been around long enough now that people know who they are and they know what they do. And maybe they haven't always been, but are now, I think, very good ambassadors to the general public from the disabled community. They're very visible, and it allows the community to see the disabled working effectively in their jobs. Now, we could streamline subsidies to employers who hire the disabled. There are federal work opportunity tax credits. There's the Virginia Department on Aging and Rehab Services. They provide unpaid work experience for employers hiring disabled people. There is on-the-job training reimbursement, in which the state reimburses employers for job training expenses for hiring disabled folks. There are federal and state bonding programs that are designed to limit the liability of employers, paying them back for damages or loss due to the hiring of disabled folks. There's special minimum wage certificates so that employers maybe don't have to pay $15 an hour for these folks if we ever make it to that in Virginia. And then there are annual tax credits for making your business accessible to people with disabilities, removal of barriers in businesses, and expenses incurred to make changes in architecture and engineering and such, tax incentives for that. So if these things were better publicized, and if those stories about how hiring folks with disabilities can be good business decisions, and if you can make those visible to the broader community, then you can promote employment of people with developmental disabilities better in our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
I believe the Lord has a purpose for everyone in their life, regardless of their backgrounds, their skills, their handicaps. I think we need to rethink sometimes our workforce training out here, because we may be leaving out an important element. While they may not be high-skilled individuals with a handicap, at the same time, there are some very bright, intelligent individuals that may not physically be able to do the work of craftsmen or people like that. And I think there's where the government can help in these areas, help provide skill-based schooling for individuals such as this. I think about, how can some of these folks get involved here locally? I deal with some mail shops that hire people, and most of them retired, to actually stuff envelopes. They pay them per piece. When a person has a job and at the end of the day, they have accomplished something and they're rewarded with pay, that gives them pride, self-esteem, motivation in their life that they are successful, regardless of their handicap. I think these are certainly ways that we can help to do things on an area that doesn't cost a lot of money, but helps our communities, whether it's employers out here, generates income for these individuals so they can have their own personal money to spend or spend it on whatever housing things that they may need. So I think sometimes we got to think outside of the box. And what can we do for ourselves instead of what government can do for us? Now, I think there's times that, like employers, we could help by giving them tax breaks or create some incentive for employment, whatever the pay level may be for the individual skills or products that they're doing. I think those are things that we could do on a government side with employers that want to employ individuals that you work on a daily basis. So look for opportunities in life. There are many great opportunities out here. And I think that people would be proud to have opportunities, even if it's a couple of hours a day. They're limited with their physical abilities or mental abilities, but giving them an opportunities to be as successful as they can with their limitations. I think this is very important for individuals. And that's what you guys know how to do, work with these individuals and help them. So I think sometimes it takes a community working together. How can we support your organization? And how can business help as well? So when we work together as a family, we're much happier at the end of the day. And we don't have to point fingers at everybody else and say, well, it's your fault, you failed. Give people incentives and motivations at whatever level to try to be successful in life and accomplish the abilities that God has given them.
Thank you. A recent study in Virginia shows that a large number of students with developmental disabilities would like, but are not able to receive appropriate supports in their local public schools, in large part because of services funding that remains almost exclusively accessible only to students who are placed in outside, less integrated private day schools. Local divisions and advocates have been working for several years to provide choice to students and families in the educational placement that works best for each student. How do you think Virginia can better support schools and students to provide and fund that necessary services they need in their least restrictive environment, wherever they may be? Mr. Eaton?
Well, this is an example of something that government can fix. This is another one of those joint legislative audit and review commission studies in 2019, and this one was focused on this same issue. And I think because the cost of these services for private day school services as part of the Children's Services Act program were skyrocketing. They increased from 81 million to 186 million in since fiscal year 2010. So in 10 years, and that's about 14% per year. Half of this growth in spending or in cost was through increased enrollment. There were more people served. They started at younger ages. They stayed there for longer periods of time. About half of this increase in cost was increased tuition charges. But they also found that generally speaking, the private day schools in Virginia were not gouging folks. They had modest or at least acceptable profit margins. They did operate most of them as profit centers, but they had modest profit margins. The real issue was that state law and policy prohibited Children's Services Act program funding to be used in public schools, prohibits that funding to be used in public schools. So these funds pay for private day school services, but the CSA, the Community Service Board, sort of administers these funds, but they don't have any say in placement decisions. They don't have any say in individual service plans for these kids. Those are handled by local school districts and the state Department of Education. And also that department is who licenses day schools. And private day schools aren't subject to the same performance reporting as public schools. And this implies that caregivers and parents don't really have the same quality of information from these private schools on performance and success. And so this, one of the recommendations of this JLARC study was that funding for developmentally disabled educational services, rather than being funneled through the Department of Behavioral Health and Disability Services and community service boards, that they be funded through the Department of Education, and that may be a much more efficient administration of these funds. Alternately, changes in state law and policy allowing Child Services Act funds to be spent in public school settings, just change the rule, change the law. You could also increase private day school reporting requirements. They have different requirements or different allowances for seclusion and restraint protocols for this population. Some of these developmentally disabled folks require that. Public schools have different protocols and different allowances for seclusion and restraint. So a lot of things have to be worked out, like who among the behaviorally and developmentally disabled folks are good candidates for public school integration. I know that both of my daughters attended elementary school with developmentally disabled students in their class. One. In both cases, it was one. I wasn't there every day, of course, but the behavior of the majority of those classmates toward the disabled student was really heartwarming. They were very, very helpful to the teacher. They were compassionate to the students in their classroom. So a lot of daunting issues, I think, to returning disabled students to the classroom, to an integrated classroom. Well, there are some of those that need to be worked out, but I think it's really worth it. And I think the Department of Education would be helpful in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
I think there needs to be strong consideration of altering how Virginia funds its education programs out here. If there's one government program that is broken in Virginia, that is the Department of Education. There are a lot of great teachers, but when it comes to the administration, the school boards, who are they servicing out here? people with disabilities should have the same priorities, the same opportunities as any other citizen out here. And I think that's one thing that we're missing. And actually, we're creating or discriminating against these individuals. So whether they have the funds to go to a private school, a public school, these folks should have the same opportunity as any other young person, whatever their age may be, going through our public school systems. You know, I'm disappointed sometimes when I hear things that come out of our local school boards and not listening to parents and understanding what the needs are, because every student is unique. They're not all alike. They all have different needs. Some learn at a faster rate, some learn at a slower rate. Some may have more physical handicaps and learning how to use a computer or technology and things like that. But they still have those needs. And I think that's where we have got to look at how we are utilizing our funds, whether it's the public schools or money following the students. I think that would be a better concept to maybe consider out here. Probably more of an opportunity to help people with disabilities out here if they had more choices. And that is important. People should have choices by which they choose to achieve their educational skills or abilities to move forward in life. So I think there's some things that we need to look at. What can we do better on the local area? So is our local school board open to working with individuals with handicaps? You know, regardless of whatever that, if it's a physical or a mental challenge, this is taxpayers' money. And these individuals with these needs need to have the same service and the same opportunities out there. And we shouldn't be discriminating against, you know, people that have handicaps. You know, there are great teachers out here, teachers that love, that have the gift of teaching, that understand the disabilities or the handicaps that people have. I think we need to spend more time listening to the teachers and how we can better service our community and get the bureaucracy out of the way. If we want to have a better community by which everybody can enjoy the riches of life, then the opportunities are there. It's just, we've got to get rid of the bureaucracy that stands in the way. Certainly with the public education funding, in most cases, it's higher than a lot of these public schools out here. So people with disabilities should have the same opportunity to sit in the classrooms or special classrooms, if that may be the case, by which to achieve that academic excellency that we all want for everybody, for every individual. There shouldn't be any handicap when it comes to learning in Virginia. If we love people, we care enough about people, we'll find the way to help them.
Thank you. A large number of Virginians with developmental disabilities rely on a direct service professional, DSP, for at least some level of daily support. Current reimbursement rates for Medicaid waiver services are structured to yield an average annual salary of under $23,000, which has contributed to high turnover rates in their critical field, instability for already vulnerable families, and a lack of financial security for DSPs. How can the Commonwealth address this issue in the upcoming session and help provide some stability to both waiver recipients and their caregivers? Mr. Eaton, please.
Providing the stability to the caregivers should then provide stability to recipients, because they're in that situation together. Virginia does have flexibility in how and how much it spends on the state share of Medicaid services. Increases in state spending on Medicaid can be offset by the corresponding increase in federal Medicaid matching funds and by multiplier effects of increased spending across the economy. Medicaid expansion was a key accomplishment in the services provided to the most needy in Virginia. And it may ultimately be found to act as a general stimulus to economic growth. Reimbursement rates for services rendered under Medicaid waivers, that of direct service providers, for example, they can be different than those set for services paid through the standard medical assistance rate, and they are authorized in the annual state budget. In this regard, the General Assembly and the executive branch are in the driver's seat. They're not hamstrung by federal rules. They can do as they wish. The annual budget is negotiated and improved by the executive and latest legislative branches, and a new state budget will be adopted by the new governor, and a new General Assembly in 2022. And I know this sausage making of the state budget is endlessly complex with rules and alternate competing goals and tortuous processes. But in the end, a state's balanced annual budget is a reflection of the values we place on services to our citizens and the value that we place on our citizens. Revenue and spending priorities can be structured to favor some groups and activities over others. If state government values diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think it should, then it should structure its annual budget to provide the greater share of services to those most in need. Increasing the Medicaid waiver reimbursement rate for direct service providers could help provide a living wage to critical frontline workers, increase employment and productivity, and be fiscally advantageous.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
The $23,000 certainly, I think, can be increased. And maybe one of the ways was a bill that was put in by a Senator, Ryan McDougal, back in 2020 as SB 521. And that was the Medicaid physical oversight and accountability. An office to be created to review these records and how funds are being utilized. Because when we cut out the waste in government, then we actually have more money that goes directly to the recipients or the beneficiaries of these funds that are so much needed out here. So I think one thing that helps us in to be able to find more funds out here to the individuals that need it the most is find better ways by which we can efficiently examine the faults within our government agencies that we can improve more efficiently for funds. You know, we have so much money to spend. We have good years, we have bad years, we have rainy day funds, and trying to divide this pie up financially to where everybody has a piece of the pie sometimes is a bigger challenge than I think most people can understand and comprehend unless you're a CEO of a large corporation here. But at the end of the day, constitutionally, we're required to balance our budget. So with anticipated funds coming in, we try to be efficient in allocating those funds to the agencies, to the services by which they provide. But we also have to be prepared for those rainy days. Sometimes when that income is not coming in. We've been very fortunate in the last year by which to have some surpluses. And so with that money first should be considered going back to the taxpayers, back to us, the individuals who are actually paying for our government. And then where we can utilize these funds to be more efficiently used, I think people would be more acceptable for the tax dollars being used when they can see the end results is benefiting our local people here or the people within our community that have those specific needs. So this limit, I think, certainly could be increased by a more efficient way in which we govern and provide services to the constituents and to individuals that you work with.
Thank you both very much. Heather? We have some questions for each of you that have come through our chat. I cannot see those, but Hannah, Jane, or Heather, would you like to read those or?
They look like the same questions we just covered.
Okay.
Is that in the chat box?
Yeah, I think they were just putting those in there for.
Yes, the questions in the
record.
chat were just for everybody to follow along. But if any attendees have questions, those would be in the Q&A option.
Okay.
No open questions.
I don't see
I don't have a question, but I would like to make maybe a closing comment, I suppose you could call it that. A lot of the things that happen in Richmond during the General Assembly session, of course, impact you all, and they impact the people that you serve very directly in some cases by allocating different reimbursement rates to people who are the frontline workers for the developmentally disabled. And a lot of those processes, negotiations in Richmond are driven by ideology. Many legislators, I'm not necessarily putting a value judgment on these, but they are driven by preconceived notions about how government is supposed to work, about whether it should be big or small. And those legislators are not as effective, and they're not as impressive to me personally as the legislators who dig in to the dirt and dig into the nuts and bolts of how these things actually work in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's been really, really eye-opening and educational for me to participate in this. When you all presented those questions, I recognized right away that I didn't need to have, or maybe don't necessarily need to have, positions on those questions. They weren't really seeking positions. They were designed, if you ask me, surely this was purposeful. They were designed to make me figure it out on my own, to make me investigate these issues and these policies, and through that self-education, illuminate the processes that go on in Richmond to make our state function the way it does. It is a really great place to live, Virginia is. And lately, I think we have been doing a great job of attracting business, of serving our citizens with effective services that they need. I think it's a happier place to live these days. I know that there are, at-risk populations like the developmentally disabled that maybe you feel are always get the short end of the stick. They're always short shrifted because they don't have lobbyists, or at least they don't have really loudmouth lobbyists who work on their behalf in Richmond. They have more frequently people who really care, who have big hearts and just want to help. So it's really key, I think, to have a General Assembly that you can work with. People in the General Assembly, be it legislators or their staff, who value the hard work of digging into these nuts and bolts and these issues and working out compromises with other legislatures, on how, for example, these monies should be spent. So hats off to those folks. I respect them and in some ways envy them. Not sure that I want to be that much of a policy wonk. That's not been my training in the past, but I did find this process really illuminating. Thanks.
Right, since Mr. Eden had a closing comment, I would like to extend the same invitation to you, Greg, to come to Richmond during session, and I'd be happy to share with you the difficult decisions that we have to make on behalf of the citizens out here. While there is partisans in Richmond, I think at the end of the day, we're all out here serving people, which is our priority, or that's my priority. And the more I can understand the issues of Virginians and how we can better service them, I think that's what we're here. We're servants of the people. If I had to depend on my salary $17,400 a year to live on. We don't even make minimum wage. But what I enjoyed the most is the joy of helping people and see the smile on their face that we're actually doing something to benefit them. One reason that I'm involved in this is that there are a lot of problems with the government. Virginia should be #1 in the United States of America in every area: job, workforce, education. I am not satisfied. I don't like being second best. Virginia is a great state, rich history, great people, great heritage here. We can all do better if we're willing to work together, put the partisans behind us, and help find solutions for individuals, because that's what we're here to do, is to serve people. And I want to thank the ARC for the opportunity to share with you guys tonight. Greg, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you, and appreciate what you guys are doing. And please come see us, and I'd love to come over and visit with you at any time. You've got my contacts. So God bless you. Good evening.
Thank you so much to both of you for your time and effort.
So is this Zoom out time? Or any questions? I mean,
Heather?
Yes, sorry, I was having mute issues. Yes, no, thank you both so much for just what you had to say this evening. I know these questions were probably not easy to answer, and so we just appreciate you taking the time to just really understand the issues that individuals and their families face on a regular basis. And since we're extending invitations, I would like to just anytime either of you would like to come and visit the ARC and see what we do, you know, firsthand and meet the individuals we serve, we'd love to have you. So thank you again.
Thank you too.
Have a great evening.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.